And we're back. Thank you for listening. This is the Catholic Lady, and we are reading The Great Lion of God by Taylor Caldwell. We are in the middle of chapter 9. We will continue, and at this point it's returning back to the house of Shabuah ben Abraham. Saul went to the temple for the first time and was totally emotionally overwhelmed by the glory that was there. And he felt something touch him, a spirit, a hand, which to him seemed to emanate from a group of countrymen that lay on their faces. But that voice that talked to him in his sleep spoke to him again and told him to be quiet. It wasn't quite time. And he's beginning to wonder if he's going mad. So we'll return now, chapter 9, part 2. Though Clodia Flavius had commanded her Jewish cooks to prepare the proper feast for the holy days, and no rich and ritualistic dish had been excluded, and the prescribed wines had been provided, the prayers and the ceremonies at the table in the magnificent dining room were languid and perfunctory. The goblets might be of gold, and the platters and plates of the finest wrought silver, the spoons and the knives of artful Egyptian charm, the wreathed candlesticks and lamps scented and exquisite, the cover fashioned of cloth of gold, the Alexandrian glass, the crystal vases filled with scarlet and white and purple flowers. But there was none of the sober gaiety that follows the Day of Atonement, when men believe fervently that the book of their last year's sins had been closed by the angel of God, and a new year of hope and faith lies before them. Shabuah ben Abraham and his sons and their sons did not wear the embroidered and jeweled caps befitting their situation in society. They did not wear caps at all. Hillel ben Baruch and his son Saul wore them only. They had listened to Shabuah's desultory and abbreviated prayers, and they detected the faint and indulgent amusement in his creamy voice and the inui. They knew he was making a polite gesture in the direction of the faith he had abandoned, even as aesthetic Romans and Greeks poured libations to the gods. It was a pretty gesture, and Hillel suspected even that was made only because of the presence of himself and Saul. Shabuah was a man of gestures. Hillel bitterly wondered if he were anything else, for though Hillel listened keenly, he never once heard Shabuah make an original remark, though he was very proficient in quotations from the mighty Greek philosophers and Virgil and Homer, which he delivered with a graceful wave of his hand and a soft smile that requested admiration. Even these remarks, virile and passionate often in context, exuded desultory daintiness. I am sure, thought Hillel, who was rarely moved to deep vexation, knowing that the frailties of men, that even his excrement is perfumed and his urine scented. How he had brought himself to the sweat and lustiness and violent thrust of begetting these sons of his is beyond my imagination. He has 2 concubines. I am certain they are still virgins. No doubt he delights them with a lyre or poems or pretty little songs. Or, thought Hillel, becoming more and more incensed, it may be that he is a practicer of Platonic love, in imitation of the Greeks. He glanced down the gleaming table at his father-in-law, and despised him. Shabuah had elegantly disposed in his ebony and pearl-inlaid chair. He played with his goblet. He ate with an air of absent discrimination, every gesture excessively refined. His blue tunic, belted with an intricate web of gold and gems, was heavily embroidered. His arms were banded in armlets, glittering like stars. On his right index finger was a fine ring which Herod Antipas had given him for favors or friendship unknown. He had refrained from the last enormity, Egyptian necklaces fringed with gold and jewels and earrings. These he had left to David ben Shabuah. Again, Hillel thought that David was a parody of his father, and then he felt he was unkind. David had more intelligence than his sire, and was capable of a little originality and a little sudden imagination. Perhaps that was why Shabua disliked him more than he disliked the more pragmatic and avaricious, I can't say the word, avaricious Simon and Joseph, who made no pretense at scholarship and were frankly worldly and unashamed of their worldliness. The dining room was finer even than the dining room of Herod Antipas or Pontius Pilate, as they had admitted themselves. It was, in truth, a banquet hall, of the purest white marble imported from Italy. No color touched it except for the passionately colored murals on the white walls, beautifully executed by the best of artists. The thrown Persian carpets and the high ceiling of fretted copper in a maze of entwining forms and angles, the snowy columns of Corinthian design, no Ionian simplicity for Shabua, had their capitals delicately tinted. And on pedestals in niches stood nude and indelicate little statuettes of white marble brought from Greece. The evening was hot. The bronze doors stood open, and the pale silken curtains had been drawn back. And Jerusalem lay below them on her hills, tier rising upon tier, sharply illuminated. They could hear the fountains outside, musically laughing at the stars, and could smell the fragrance of warm gardens under the dew. Everything that met the eye was entrancing, and Hillel appreciated it, but did not appreciate his host and the brothers of Deborah. Hillel, forgetting the graceful conversation about the table for a moment, looked at the young man who would marry Sephora. Certainly he was not handsome like his father David, but neither did he resemble his grandfather Shabua ben Abraham. Thanks be to God. Blessed be his name. The youth was shy and silent, but his eyes were very blue and candid, his expression alert yet retiring. He sat next to Saul, who was very gray of face tonight, and whose features were yet set in a tense and inflexible look, as if his thoughts were far from the room and his kinsmen were bent on seeking, yet in terror of the seeking. His coarse white linen tunic did nothing to enhance his appearance, nor did that vital flare of red hair and the deep lost blue metal of his eyes. The prophets had often spoken of the fire that inflamed their hearts with the love of God. For the fire was love given and received, and it was rapture and ecstasy. O love of my desiring, thought Hillel. And he felt the hot burn of tears in his eyes. But this was not the love which his son knew, for all his transports in the temple. Hillel sighed again, and turned with pain from his son, and listened to his boring father-in-law again. Then he spoke. Shabua, you have been conversing of the wonderful conceptual abstractions of the Greeks, out of which rose their code of ethics, which they observe no longer. Anything based on abstractions is alien to the flesh and the life of men. Abstractions are the toys of the effete mind, which will endure no suffering, or the sight or sound of suffering, or any of the fevers and sores and agonies of the flesh, particularly of other men. I not only call this trivial and insulting to the manhood of humanity, but disgusting. Words are no substitute for actualities, nor exquisite phrases a poultice for reality. Men are born, they excrete, they fornicate and void. They are tortured in their flesh. They smell, they often reek. They must labor and pay taxes. They sleep, they eat, they beget, they die. These are the earthly and immutable verities of our being, our flesh. We cannot disguise them forever in the silk and embroideries of what you choose to call Greek civilization, or any other civilization, or in cantos or pentameters, however pretty, however sublime. I do not denigrate poetry or music, or any of the other decorations men can invent. For life is not lovely, not comely, for man or beast. I admire, while I pity, these desperate efforts to hide the appalling face of reality. For none can bear the vision long with tranquillity, or without the help of God, or without softening her lineaments with the veil of art. But we must admit it is only a veil. If we do not, then we shall surely go mad. Shabua narrowed his pale eyes upon him and began to speak, but Hillel lifted his hand. I beg your forbearance for a moment longer, he said, and he was aware that he was boring Simon and Joseph. They had fastened a look of exaggerated filial respect on their father while he had been speaking before Hillel's interruption, and he had bored them even more. They did not conceal their ennui for Hillel, and leaned back in their chairs with expressions of resignation. You would say, Hillel continued, that art and the graces of the mind distinguish us from beasts, but we are beasts with them. I do not call this degrading. I call this coming to terms with reality. From that strong base we can proceed, and we must never deny it, for if we do, again, we shall go mad. It is said that animals have no souls. I dispute this. It is of no moment. You have implied that animals have no code of ethics. Who has enlightened you on this? I have seen animals and the birds with more mercy and solicitude for their kind than any man has displayed. Animals do not betray, they do not exploit, they do not oppress, they do not enslave, they do not sin. They have their being, and their being is honest. And who can say this of man? It was necessary for men to invent ethics, for before God blessed be his name, man was not born with ethics, nor could he survive without them. He is the fierce devourer of his brother, a cannibal, and no other animal is such except rats, who disquietingly resemble man. As an exercise in grace and in handsome reason, I admire the intellectual code of ethics of the Greeks. I admire the Romans' hubris, the pride of country and race. I admire the Roman law, for it is based on human reality, as the ethics of the Greeks are not. But as neither of the ethics of the Greeks nor the law of the Romans is based on God and the reality of God, they have no true verity except in the most narrow of senses. It is only the ancient laws of the Jews, set in the matrix of the reality of God, which can survive in this world, for they are cast in mercy, in compassion, in love, in justice, all the attributes of God. To us, life is sacred, and this is true of no other religion, no code of merely mortal ethics, however grand the language and profound the thought. The Greeks were never urged to love their fellow man. The idea is preposterous to Romans. It was to the Babylonians and the Egyptians, except for one very brief period in Egyptian history far long ago. Only to Jews is human life sacred. Only to us was given the commandment, thou shalt not kill. I will concede that we have obeyed this commandment no more heartily in our past, though we knew of it, and than the other peoples obeyed, and they knew it not. Yet it is there, thou shalt not kill. For uncountable generations the Greeks have practiced infanticide. They find nothing immoral in that. They say it is a way of controlling their numbers. The Romans have begun to practice it also, and feel no repugnance, no guilt. Other nations have practiced this direful crime without horror. But Jews do not practice infanticide. They do not kill lightly. The wars are no occasion for rejoicing, though we are a warrior people. For God has warned us not to kill. He has warned us to love and revere and fear him, and to love our fellows. Surely, Shabua ben Abraham, you will admit that our ethics, based on God, are superior to the ethics of the Greeks and the Romans, and that our civilization, however it amuses you, is more attuned to the nature of man and God than any other. Saul, stricken and mute, began to listen. He looked with astonishment at his father and did not know him. For the usually gentle and conciliating Hillel had a tawny flame in his eyes, and his face was deeply flushed. "You are very eloquent, Hillel ben Baruch," said Shabuah, whose pale face had a faint shadow of malevolence on it. "I can hardly believe this of a rigid Pharisee, for Pharisees are notoriously devoid of both eloquence and subtlety. But I concede nothing of what you have spoken, nor do I admit the verity of it. You speak as a Jew." "And you are not a Jew?" exclaimed Hillel, and the hand he had laid on the table trembled with wrath. Shabuah glanced slowly at his sons and smiled faintly. "We are citizens of the world," he said. "We believe in mankind. We do not believe in God. But we believe that man has infinite possibilities and potentialities, and that he will rise to them when he has abandoned superstition and relies only on himself. We are men now, not children. We need no staff of emulating idolatry and craven fear of the invisible to sustain us. We need no commandments, but our own superior minds and the probabilities of our minds. We no longer hear God in the thunder. We understand the thunder. It is not fire on Sinai. It is natural and mindless lightning. They do not dwell in tents now, nor are we barbarians. For children, there are the beliefs of children, and the little fears and terrors, for they know nothing and have no knowledge. But we are men in these days, and we know what sustains a man, and what hidden strengths lie in man, and we will evoke them." "Oh," cried Hillel with unusual passion, "you have embraced the folly of pride, and how dare man be proud? Of what can he be proud? His history? May God forgive us this blasphemy. You have often spoken of the future. The future is born in the womb of the present, and I see nothing in the present or in the past that promises glory for man created by himself. For he cannot rid himself of his baseness by his own effort. It is written that man cannot earn merit by himself, for he is undeserving of merit. History is our witness. Man was not born for his glorification. Scripture teaches us that man was born solely to know and to love and to serve God, and nothing else. And in that knowing and loving and serving alone can he transcend his nature and become more than man." Shabuah smiled at him, as if at an imbecile, and shook, with a pretense of forbearing indulgence, his thin finger at Hillel. "I deny your premises, Hillel ben Baruch. To me, your syllogism is without validity or truth. For your premise is God. I, therefore, deny your premise. You should define your terms, as Socrates has said. But you and I could never agree on the terms. Therefore, the argument is futile. But I will repeat that man can transcend what you call his baseness, but which I prefer to call his piteous ignorance, by cultivating his latent powers of mind and will. This the Greeks have said. I see nothing to dispute this. We advance. We progress. Yesterday we were savages. Today we have the Parthenon. We have the law of the Romans. We have poetry and a repugnance for barbarism, which again you would call the baseness of men. We have refinements of the mind, a love of beauty. We are inventive. One day, as the Egyptians have said, we shall stride the suns, and nothing shall be closed from us. Part of our being may be animal, and we live in our flesh as do other animals, but they do not advance. They are today what they were yesterday, but our tomorrows are filled with glorious promise. They are filled with death, said Hillel, and ever will they be, until the Messiah comes, blessed be his name, and reveals the hidden to us, and gives our evil ablution in his love, and makes makes of mankind, not through human law and human contriving and human conquest, only of one blood and one flesh and one spirit, and we shall know war and hatred no more. Hillel was inspired. He could no longer control his unaccustomed passion, for he saw the derision and the scorn of his kinsmen, and the affront against God. He shook his fist at them and could not refrain. "You Sadducees," he cried, "you have taken bread from men, and have given them husks. You have taken the morning from them, and have given them the darkness of hell, in which God is lost. You have based your hopes on the world, which will pass away and be known no more among the suns and the Pleiades, nor will Orion know her any longer. On this frail orb that pursues her star, you think to establish the golden city of man's reason and man's aspiring alone, forever and a day? You believe it will be by the will and design of man alone that evil will be abolished. Yet evil is the very nature of man and immutable. He is a shadow, and on the shadows you would erect eternal palaces and pleasure ways and advance urban conversation and peace, and what you aver are ethics. You know you are mortal, and in your shallow hearts you deny mortality, and speak of the far future as if you will be there alive and triumphant. You did not know the future, but you have deluded yourselves that you will be there. Or is your vaunted glory of man in the future enough for you? Who will be dust tomorrow?" He was breathing audibly. He searched each man's coldly derisive face, and he saw the fear in them and the terror of death. He smiled compassionately. "How pathetic you are, and your own death in this little time has not been believed by you. You have really hoped you will be part of the future which to me appears terrible, not beautiful. You believe in pleasure, in the day's tranquility and the grace in conversation and the meeting of friends. You hold the power of the temple now, and you have profaned it. You deny the resurrection of the dead, which has been promised. For you believe that when men are dead, they are no more than the beasts of the field. It is evil enough that you have betrayed God. You have betrayed your people to the Romans, to his oppressive tax gatherers. You have betrayed their pride in their nation. You have plunged us into despair. You have consorted with the Roman to enslave the helpless. You have helped him gather his taxes for the support of an idle and polyglot Rome, where men live on the earnings of others and who will not toil as we are forced to toil. For peace in your mind and pleasure and worthless harmonies and prettinesses and conversing and pride and dainty perversities and music and corabants and dancing girls and money and handsome horses, houses and villas and servants and laughter and strange women and theaters and baths and arenas and gambling and horses and evil little appetites and enjoyments, you have called upon your people not to resist, not to believe in the promise of the ages, to obey, to bow down their heads, to submit their necks to the yoke. You have taken God from them, and for that you will not be forgiven." Shabua's face had become thin and livid, so that it resembled the blade of an axe, and he no longer pretended to conceal his hatred. It glowed in pale fire in his eyes. He said, "What would you have us do, we leaders of our people, Hillel ben Baruch? Advise them to rise as the zealots and the Essenes have, those madmen, and strike at the omnipotent Roman, so cause our country to be put to the flame, to the fire, and to the sword? Would you urge them not to pay taxes to the Roman? Is life not better than death? Are taxes, however onerous, not better than the grave? Is not even slavery preferable to slaughter? Obedience to the conqueror is, to the reasonable man, less terrible than execution or starvation. As Solomon has said, better a live dog than a dead lion. The Lion of Judah is dead, and we are alive like dogs," said Hillel with immense bitterness. Shabua shrugged. "We are alive. What would you have us do?" Hillel fixed him with his brilliant eyes. We are a conquered little country. The Roman is all-powerful. These I admit. I do not desire my people's death, for in them lives the Spirit of God, and of them will be born the Messiah. I would not have them die on miles of crosses. I would not see their wives and their children slaughtered. No, but it was your duty, your sons of Zadok, and how glorious is that memory, to sustain your people with the hope of the Messiah, to alleviate their hunger with your fortunes, to intercede for them, to nourish their faith in their God, blessed be his name, to exalt them with patience in their tribulations, to turn their eyes to the sun and to the stars, to repeat to them the promise that has been given to us, to strengthen their endurance, that man will not suffer inquietude if he knows his Redeemer is nigh, and that God has not abandoned him. But you are taking from your people the only sustenance that will save them. You have darkened their souls. You have delivered them from the Romans like chained slaves, and have said to them, "This is what is, and there is nothing more, so resign yourselves." And what have you asked this resignation? In mercy for your people? No, only for luxury and peace for yourselves. And you dare prate of the glorious future of mankind, you betrayers of what is noblest in man, you poisoners of wells of the water of life. It was unpardonable to rise before the host, but Hillel could not contain himself. So deep was his pity for his people, his anguish for their oppression, his torment for their poverty and pain and endless labor, his fury at their betrayal by their own, his torture that they had been deprived of hope, and so great was his anger. He struggled to compose himself. His voice had become hoarse. He lifted his hands like a prophet, and he was not ashamed of the tears on his cheeks, though the hate and derision of his kinsmen were like a deathly fog in the room now. He said, in the words of David, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble. There will not, we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High." The silence in the room was palpable, as though a prophet had thundered within it, and no sentient thing could make sound. When Hillel turned and began to move from the room, and after a moment Saul followed him, and they did not look back. In the atrium Hillel, shaken to the heart, was unable to speak for weeping. He put his hands on his son's shoulders and bowed his head, and Saul put his own hands on the shoulders of his father, and despised himself that he had not believed him capable of such passion, and such holy anger, and such righteousness, and another woe was added to the woe he carried in his heart. They heard a footstep and looked up, half hiding their tears, to see Clodia Flavius and 3 of her women moving across the atrium on a mission to be certain that the host and his kinsmen were properly served by the servants. Clodia halted and looked keenly into Hillel's face, but her own remained calm. The Roman woman said in a voice of understanding and consolation, "Shalom." It was Hillel, looking into her face, who answered, and his voice broke, "Shalom, Clodius Flavius." Saul could not understand. He felt affront and bafflement, and left his father and went to his bedroom. And that's the end of chapter 9.